poll, and the recording has started. Great. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Kristen Davis, and I'm the DLEC co-director, as well as Senior Research Fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute. And welcome to the Feed the Future Developing Local Extension Capacity webinar on Extension and Advisory Services Roles in COVID-19, Experiences and Recommendations. Just as we start, we're doing this poll. So far, the Americas and Caribbean are ahead. So please keep telling us where you're from via the poll and introduce yourselves via the chat. Chelsea is managing our slides. Thanks very much. You can move to the next slide, slide 2, which should talk about DLEC a little bit more. Yes. So the Developing Local Extension Capacity is a Feed the Future project that measurably improves extension programs, policies, and services using targeted diagnostics, locally tailored and partnership-based solutions, and mobilizing active communities of practice to advocate for scaling proven technologies and approaches. We can share the web page for DLEC in our chat box. It's also going to be in the last slide. And this webinar is one of the activities of our community of practice. You can join the community of practice through the link at the end of the slides. Maybe somebody can post that in our chat box as well. So just before I turn over to the moderator, just to give you an overview of the webinar process, some quick tips and etiquette. We are recording the webinar. There's the chat box to introduce yourselves, and there's a Q&A box to ask questions. We hope to have time following the panel discussion for Q&A from the participants, from the audience, and we'll be answering some of those questions on the go as we get started. If you turn to slide 3, I just wanted to give a brief introduction that there's this increasing concern that the COVID outbreak is going to have bad consequences on food security, resilience, livelihoods in rural areas and urban areas too. And to prevent, food crisis and other shocks and problems to the system, we need institutions and governments that are adequately prepared. Extension and advisory services are an essential institution for productivity, for rural communication, as you'll be hearing about today. And this pandemic is actually not the first time that extension and advisory services have been asked to support crises. It's an institution that has trained staff. They're trusted by local communities. They've got that local reach, they've got communication skills, and they've supported efforts and educated communities during crises like the HIV/AIDS crisis, Ebola, avian influenza, and natural disasters, as we heard about from the GFROS annual meeting last year. So in this webinar, we're going to review experiences of extension and advisory services during the COVID-19 crisis, and also give recommendations to countries to support rural food production and livelihoods. I'd like to turn the floor now to Dr. Carl Larsen. He's the Executive Secretary of the Global Forum for Rural Advisory Services, or GFROS. Carl has 30 years of experience in the field of international development and has worked in many different areas: research, education, and extension. So we're looking forward to hearing from Carl and the rest of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine. Actually, you will not hear much from me because I will very soon hand over the floor to the panel, who comes with very interesting inputs. And as you can see on the screen, we have 4 panelists. Dr. Ismail, who's Associate Professor at the University in St. John in Iran, who will talk about Iran's Extension and Advisory Services responses to COVID-19. After that, very long name, so I will just use the common names. Andrew will come and talk. He is an ICT and Knowledge Management Coordinator with the African Forum for Agricultural Advisory Service, called AFAS, in Uganda, and he will talk about Africa's extension and advisory service systems readiness for crisis. And after that, Kevin Perkins will come. He's an executive director of Farm Radio International, and he will talk about the radio as a channel during crisis. And last speaker will be Dr. Norma Samuel, who's an extension agent with the University of Florida. And she will be talking about the US extension responses to COVID-19. Ismail, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm so pleased to be in this webinar and share some of the experiences we have had in Iran for responding to COVID-19. As Kristen said, agricultural activities and rural communities are highly vulnerable to some of these diseases and natural disasters. And the COVID-19 is also one of the important issues. If we look at this diagram, we can see 6.6 million people in the world and 160,000 people, 160,000 people in Iran have been already affected, and over 8,000 people in Iran now has been dead, and but fortunately over 80% of the people have been recovered, and in the world 3.2 million people. So the first cases in Iran was reported in 19 February 2020, and we didn't have enough experience about this pandemic, and also there are lots of overpressure from this issue was imposed to health systems, and lots of psychological impacts also were in the communities, both in rural and urban communities. So still we have this problem, and as you see, Iran is one of the top 12 countries has been affected, and we think this will continue by the end of the year, and we have to continue our activities. Please, in the next slide, please. Yeah. So the Ministry of Health and Medical Education was in the control of this coronavirus, but other ministries and organizations were called to have a contribution for controlling of this outbreak. So the government started to have public awareness approaches in parallel to other control measures, and using mass and electronic media, radio, TV, social media, text messages, but all of them were general messages to all of the communities, not specifically for the farmers or to rural communities. So agricultural extension, through agricultural extension and education institute of the Ministry of Agriculture, came and made and established a national working group in 10 March, and we as the university also were close to them, and we started to think how we can work in this issue, and how agriculture extension can. And we started to see that agriculture extension in 1950, 1960, and 1970 has had these roles in some other diseases, for example, malaria control. And we came and have in this working group, we tried to produce materials, application, and electronic pamphlets, over 30 publications for different agricultural activities we produce, and also graphic videos or motion graphics, short messages, and all of them were disseminated through the social networks applications, either in international applications or those who have been domestically has been produced. So training staff was another activities, and using webinars, video conferences, and radio and TV, both local and the national TV and radio program came to join, and several programs specifically for farmers and rural communities and nomads were produced. Please, the next. Sorry. Yeah. So our result shows that almost 10,000 public extension staff, including 7,700 extension agents, were covered by these messages. And local leaders, community-based organizations, local facilitators, and most farmers received this type of messages through the, as I said, through this type of mass media. But extension agents also had individual communications with farmers, as you see in these pictures. And though the group-based channels were not good for this situation, so mostly they relied on individual communication and mass and electronic communication. The extension agents also installed posters and some public boards in the villages to farmers, to those farmers or rural communities who are not able to access this type of electronic media and to use the traditional also channels. Some of the qualitative measures we have had show that to some extent rural community have used this type of advices, but we need to have more quantitative evaluation to see to what extent this huge number of farmers or rural communities and nomads have been covered. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ismail. Very good with information from Iran. I just want to say to the participants that there should be a poll on your screen if you haven't responded on it yet, on impact on COVID-19 on extension and advisory service in your country. It's coming up now, I can see. So please respond to that poll while you're listening in. And then I would like to go from Iran to Africa and call on Andrew to give his presentations. Please, Andrew, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Carl. In fact, I don't have a presentation. I will just explain what happened in Africa, especially in at AFAS level. So AFAS, as it was mentioned earlier, it's an umbrella body that networks and promote extension advisory service across Africa. It's based in Uganda, but the team is spread all across Africa, of course. And we have what we call the country forums everywhere in the different countries. So what happened exactly with the outbreak of corona by end of March, we were so alert and we had this fear that something is going to happen again. As we know, Africa has suffered from many epidemic, like as mentioned, Ebola and so on. And people are very scared about this kind of situation. And when they see on TV people falling in developed countries in the street, and also the lack of explanation of what's going to happen exactly, all the unknown and uncertainty for the future, we were at AFAS Secretariat very aware that something has to be done, of course. So the first thing we did is to try to understand how people are facing this corona, how they are prepared to face the corona. So we did a survey, and it was a kind of preparedness survey where we asked policymakers, public servants, researchers, extension managers, and even the frontline extensionists were invited to answer these questions. Now, the questions were very targeted to understand how Africans are aware of the situation and how they will behave after, how they will react if they know what has to be done. So we ask questions like how many people are living in the same shelter, how many people are interacting with you closely every day. We ask them some general knowledge about COVID-19. Do they know how it spread? What are the measures they have to take, the new habits, the symptoms, and so on. And from there, we understood that there's a lot to do. We don't have much resource, and there are also many other players who are doing the same job. So the first thing we ask the country forum is, how are your governments, the policy level, how are they behaving? Is there something happening at least at that level? Because if we have something at the government level, at least we know that someone has already started taking things seriously in charge. And then we also ask the NGOs, private sector, and all the others, how they are behaving. And especially, we created a platform where we can share and where we can exchange information. So we even created a page on afasafrica.org, the COVID-19 response, where we collect the most relevant and the most interesting information about the response from different level, whatever it is, country forum sometimes it's just organizations, some associations or groupments and so on. And we have a diversity of information that we could collect. Some are rich information and videos, some are more policy and so on. So this is what we have been able to do until now. Of course, things are progressing very quickly, and we are still continuing the effort. There has been even also a collaboration, a very close collaboration with GFRAS in the competition that maybe most of us here know, to sensitize and to find innovative solutions from grassroots. So these are some of the key activities that we've been doing, and some studies, of course, are still ongoing. Maybe I'll reply to questions later to be more precise on some aspect. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for that sum up of AFA's activities in Africa. Over to you, Kevin, on how farm radio have been responding.
Thank you. Radio communication plays an increasingly important role as physical movement of people is limited. Even in pre-COVID-19 world, radio is already a trusted source of information for rural people. It's been researched by BBC Media Action showing that radio consistently occupies an important informational and community building function during and after disasters. It can also be flexible. Some work between Farm Radio and CIMMYT in 2018, doing some work around maize production. We're able to pivot the programs quickly to respond to the emerging fall armyworm infestation. During the COVID-19 outbreak, the importance of social distancing has further emphasized the important work that radio journalists and extension workers play in reaching out to communities in their own language through mass media, such as radio. Farm Radio is currently working with over 1,000 radio broadcasters in Africa to ensure that they can challenge myths and misinformation about COVID-19 and bring critical, timely information to listeners that they may not have any other, there may be no other source of credible information than the radio program for them, or a few other sources at least. So there's 4 things that we started doing in the last month to shore up the ability of radio stations to respond to COVID-19 now, and in the follow-on in attempts to ensure that agricultural advisory and extension services are available. First, we're developing and sharing content resources such as background documents, script ideas, news stories, lists of contacts of COVID-19 experts who can be interviewed on the radio, how-to guides for the broadcasters on how to make accurate programming, how to check facts, and so forth. In total, we've shared so far about 23 of these distinct resources specifically about COVID-19 and shared them out with our network. Second, we're developing and facilitating networks of broadcasters within countries to help them learn from each other and share resources amongst one another. We've actually engaged on short-term contracts 26 local networkers in 10 countries. These are individuals who know a lot of the radio stations and broadcasters, and they can call them every week or every day to make sure they have what they need to put accurate, timely information on the airwaves. They're convening a total of 10 WhatsApp groups, each which has 50 to 200 broadcasters in them. And through these WhatsApp groups, they're able to ensure that all broadcasters are sharing accurate and timely content. Third, we've created a hotline and chatbot that broadcasters can contact, a phone number that's available to all broadcasters to call and get basic information, to check facts, speak to an expert, counter disinformation, and so forth. So far, we've received 250 interactions with broadcasters through this new hotline. And finally, we've created an emergency support fund for radio stations that are struggling to stay on the air in the face of COVID-19, which has really devastated some of their advertising revenues. So we've received so far 200 requests from radio stations for small little micro grants to help them stay on the air and provide for things like masks for their broadcasters, sanitizer, microphone mixers, editing software, and to support continuing operations, fuel costs and so forth, communication costs, so they can keep serving their listeners even as their revenues drop. Now, radio combined with mobile technology is going to play a vital role in offering advisory and extension service to millions of small-scale farmers during this time of restricted mobility. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Kevin. And over to our last speaker, Norma Samuel. Please, your turn, use the floor.
Thank you, Carl. Good day, everyone. So I will present the U.S. Cooperative Extension System's response to COVID-19. And the U.S. Cooperative Extension System covers 50 states and territories. So you can imagine the type of response that we had to coordinate, and each extension system had a different response, given that all of us pretty much took the same approach. So I'll tell you a little about it from the federal or national approach, then I'll tell you from the state approach, and then the county level at which I work. And so we've been under stay-at-home orders since about mid-March, and that's when we started to feel the full effects of COVID-19 and had to quickly try to figure out how we're going to change our extension programming to meet the needs of our stakeholders. And so at the federal level, we have, and national level, we have the Extension Disaster Education Network. And that's a network that has been around for quite a while, helping us in extension to respond to various disasters. And so they were quickly put into action to become the hub of extension's response to COVID-19. And so all of relevant information that is applicable across the board has been posted on the Eden Network website. There's also a compilation of state COVID-19 resources, so you'll find that also on the Eden Network. And then the Extension Committee on Policy, they did a community health survey, so we could try and figure out what the needs are at the community level regarding to health and families. and E-Extension had a COVID-19 webinar. And also at the federal level, resources were provided for farmers and for families to find out what the economic relief programs that were available to them. At the state level, it varied with regards to response, and each state were at different stage of readiness when it comes to giving a response to COVID-19. And so, for example, Kentucky State University, I spoke to one of the extension directors there, and he said that as a minority serving institution that works with limited resource individuals, they were not in any position, or they weren't ready for giving an online response in terms of programming. So they had to quickly readjust to do that. And so they sent out surveys to their stakeholders to find out, what's the best way to communicate with them, to get them information. And then with that information, they were able to figure out what was the best way to reach that group. So the rest of the information I'll give you is specific to us in Florida. And so I separate out my responses in terms of faculty and staff and stakeholders. So for us as faculty and staff, the administration had weekly webinar updates for us regarding COVID-19, and we pretty much got inundated daily with emails regarding COVID-19, and we found all those resources helpful because things were changing every day. Sometimes within the hour, situations were changing, and we were all working from home and policies kept changing. So we had to find ways to adjust. A lot of us found it stressful with all the pieces that were moving at us. And so it was very helpful that our administration saw it fit to provide training for us in mental well-being and work and family life balance. So that was quite useful to us. We also received training on best practices for online programming and how to make our online programming accessible to persons with disabilities. We also had protocols for in-person field visits, and those were limited to our engagement with farmers and big producers. And so we weren't going out to do the regular backyard homeowner field visits, but mostly the commercial visits. We were given permission to do those with going through certain protocols. We had to give regular deliverable reports. And so that way we keep our stakeholders informed so that they're not thinking, well, they're all working from home, what are they doing? So we gave these deliverable reports on a regular basis. With regards to stakeholders, we were getting industry updates, and when we saw the news clips and getting the reports from agents on the ground about, the losses that were being encountered by our stakeholders, it was just devastating to see what was happening. So it's critical for us being on the ground and having that connection in the community so that we're able to see how we can address those needs. And so by communicating that information to Extension Administration and to Florida Department of Ag, we're able to come up with, a survey on the impact of COVID-19. And that was a uniform way of us to assess the type of damage that was happening out there with regards to ag. And then we also, the Florida Department of Ag also had a website for connecting farmers to markets. And after a few weeks, things began to settle down in terms of losses because farmers were now you know, being creative and finding new ways to reach customers. So they were marketing directly to customers, or they were marketing online. And so that was very helpful. Also, as agents and faculty members, we were working to connect farmers to economic assistance. Next slide, please. Back one. Okay, so at the county level, so as agents working on the front line, we all had aspirations to do online programming. And COVID-19 just made that fast forward to us so quickly, we had to adapt. And we did Zoom webinars or meetings. Some agents did 4-H day camps virtually. And you know, all those were well received. We did Facebook Live, social media posts. We did YouTube broadcasts. We even did virtual field trips, virtual plant clinics where clientele could get problems diagnosed, and blogs. So those were all creative ways that we were able to adapt. And so I like to say with COVID-19, we were able to do a lot of innovative things. And this is a photo of my backyard. And I totally now look at my backyard in a different light, because I had to do a lot of educational programming from my backyard. And we've been able to increase our participation a lot more than when we were doing face-to-face programming. So that's one of the upside. And in terms of reporting, again, at the county level, we kept our advisory committees and stakeholders informed so that they can see that, hey, extension is still relevant during these times of COVID-19. And we did weekly check-in with our supervisors so that they can, you know what we're doing, and also give us guidance, and also provide deliverable report at the county level. So that's my contribution at this point.
Thank you very much, Norma, and very interesting that you actually see an increase in participation from going from face-to-face to go more virtual. That's very interesting. We have here the poll coming up, and it seems that most countries are either moderately or severely disturbance in your work in extension and advisory service due to COVID-19. And I would guess, though it doesn't say so in the poll, that it is probably mainly been the partial or full lockdown of society more than the disease in itself. So it's been all the actions that governments have taken to curb the spread of the disease that had the biggest impact. At least that's what we have heard other places. And it's not so much, of course, also a bit a scare of the disease, but mainly the limitation in transportation of input to farms and of farmed outputs to markets, because markets have been closed down, value chains have been disrupted, especially easily perishable products is very difficult to get to market before they deteriorate. All these things is what we hear from around the world. Now over to a number of questions to the panelists, and I will start with you, Ismail, Dr. Ismail from Iran. You came with a lot of examples of how you from the agricultural side have tried to mitigate and overcome the difficulties in relating directly to the producers, farmers during the lockdown. Do you have any sense of how effective this has been? We hear from the US that it have actually been more effective than the traditional system. How do you see it in Iran? Ismail?
Yeah, yes. Actually, it needs more study to say accurately to what extent our communication intervention have been effective. But based on the reports that I have qualitatively received from different provinces, agricultural extension administrations in 32 different provinces, or some of the individual feedbacks that we have received from extension agents and photos, and also they have been effective actually. But let's say that, for example, some of the extension agents, they have produced films by their mobile phones, and they have discussion with, for example, rural women or rural or farmers at their farms, and they have said, okay, what do you think about this COVID-19, and how you and your family are, what do you do in your home or in your farm to, and you see that lots of these messages and advice that have been sent to them, they are using them. Some of them, they have not have access to, for example, masks, but they have produced masks for themselves to go to their farms. And in extension activities, they have tried, for the extension agents, they have tried to have social distancing for when they have, for example, meeting with some farmers, or they have reduced the number of farmers in their meetings. Even in the agriculture extension offices at zone level or at the village level, they have tried to use these physical distancing measures. So you can say that agriculture extensions have been effective, though we have only a couple of months to work. And it was a good experience that in this crisis and similar crisis, agriculture extension can also work well.
Okay, thank you very much, Ismail. Now, Andy, I'll go to Africa with the questions to you. So I can see that there are several questions from Nigeria about this, movement from one state in Nigeria or from one country in Africa to another one. Has AFAS done any? You were talking a little bit on policy level. Have AFAS directly gone in and talked to governments that in the lockdown of the country, they have to take into consideration the movement of food for food security? Andrew, do you know if AFAS have been part of that?
Yes, maybe not directly. AFAS at secretarial level hasn't the power or the facility to influence directly governments. But we have the country forums, and in country forums we have champions. Most of these champions have good linkage with government people. So usually it's through these champions, these people who are well linked, that we try to influence. And in some countries like Malawi and Nigeria also, by the way, we have seen some very good activities, collaboration between the government people and the country forum. Now, in terms of solving the food security problem, it's a very complicated thing, of course. What we noticed in general is we have not only the problem of disruption and the impossibility to move, to travel in the countries, even the production can move, but even in places where there are some counter-urbanization process, we see that many places in remote places of Africa are not ready even to produce and to be more self-sufficient and resilient. So this is the area we are trying to also influence, not only at a state level and at the urban level, but because Africa is composed of like 70% of rural people. We have to work more on that. And if we want more food security, it's also in this area that we have to work.
Thank you very much. But I think generally, globally, what needs to come out of this is next time we get hit by something, government has to have a more diverse strategy so they can keep food security and food transport operating. I think sometimes
Absolutely.
some countries, they have hammered too hard down on all transport. And then there was also a question for the US we can take later with Norma on migrant workers, which I know globally have had a huge impact, both on agricultural production, but also on income for poor people who cannot do farm labor and migrate work anymore in cropping and in planting and in harvest seasons, which is a massive amount of people doing that globally. Kevin, I would like to come over to you. And I think that what have been talked a lot about also by Norma is this moving to e-extension. But I really see a difference that radio has an advantage compared to using more digital means, and that is that you reach people who doesn't have digital means. So do you have any estimate of how far into societies you penetrate with the radios?
Mm-hmm. Well, most people in rural areas are able to listen to the radio. They either have a radio at home or they can borrow a radio or listen with their friends. And of course now the mobile phones that are available in Africa always have the phone function, the radio function activated, so they can listen to the radio on their phones as well. What radio offers to complement e-extension, or even to be effective without e-extension, is that it's it's an audio format. People can listen. It's much easier to provide it in local languages. It reaches people right where they live in their homes. It's good for the multitasker. You can listen to the radio while other things are happening. Because it's often live and produced by hopefully skilled broadcasters, it can pivot and react and adapt to the issues of the day and listeners' needs, as well as having sort of a long-term plan for what's going to be broadcast and an agenda. Now, the relationship also between the host and the listener can be very important. People feel as though they know the host, if it's a consistent host, and they have a certain trust in them and feel like the host is communicating with them in a personal way. And so that can really be powerful for people, particularly if they have a way or opportunities to interact by phoning in or receiving a phone call or participating in a poll during the radio show. Now, this doesn't mean that it replaced the e-extension. It's one or the other. Either there's e-extension or there's radio. Rather, in combination, they can be very powerful. The radio show allows people to go into some depth and have a discussion, a dialogue, explore issues more deeply. The e-extension typically is more of a message delivery. There can certainly be some feedback received from the recipients of the messages, but it's more of a information flow, which is great, but radio can provide the dialogue, the contextualizing, the nuance, the stories, the examples, the experiences that give it more richness and can contribute more to gaining knowledge and gaining commitment and following through on decisions.
Thank you very much, Kevin. I have a plea from the organizers that everybody turn off their video.
That's the panelists.
Oh,
off.
sorry.
Off or on?
Off, right?
Oh, sorry.
No, I think that's on.
Sorry. So
that's right.
Sorry, I was mute. I'm trying both to handle video and word. So thank you, Kevin. So when you speak, turn on. I don't know what's happening to me. I get a funny face, so I will keep mine off. Norma, one of the things that I have heard in the Europe, taking for what Kevin said, one of the things I have heard in Europe is that they have actually been talking in some of the countries to going back, a little bit back to radios, because they find the ICT literacy of farmers, who is in general aging very low, and many of them cannot cope with using sort of more smarter technologies. You don't seem to have the same situation where you are, though American farmers are also a bit old. What are the lessons that other parts of the world could learn from the US? I can see, I don't know if you follow the questions, but a lot of questions to you on sharing, on some of the things that you have talked about, that you were trained and sensitized in during the lockdown. Other parts of the world would really like to know how they could learn from the US experience. So over to you, Norma.
Yes, Carl. So in terms of radio, it's difficult for us within Extension to get into radio here in the US for the most part. In some cases, there are Extension agents who have, you know, regular slots on radio or TV shows, but that's not widespread. And so each of us work within a county and we have different audiences to reach. And the most effective way for us is to disseminate the information, you know, using social media, websites. And for us, we also made sure that we still maintain that connection via phone. So if they're not able to reach us, you know, via the social media avenues, phone was still available. So they could call our office, and our office voicemails were forwarded to our computers, to our email. So they were able to connect with us that way. Also, myself and a few others within my district, we created Google Voice numbers. And so we distributed that Google Voice number so that our clientele were still able to connect with us that way. Offering programs via, you know, this avenue is a lot of work. It is a tremendous amount of work compared to offering face-to-face training. So what we've done is kind of like what we're doing here today. There are several of us, you know, collaborating on offering this program and people working behind the scenes. And so whenever we're offering webinars, for example, we have at least one other person working behind the scenes with us. If we're offering an entire day training, there's several of us behind the scenes facilitating. So it takes quite a bit more manpower, if you want to put it that way. However, as I said before, what we've noticed is that we're reaching a lot more people, and they've indicated that cutting out the travel time makes it more convenient for them. So that works well for us. In terms of what others could do, I really recommend, you know, making short video clips. So I started to do a program called Let's Talk Gardening, and it was just amazing to see, just with my phone, I was able to create these video clips and have this program that I made sure followed university protocol for dissemination. And, you know, we've been getting quite a lot of views on that. And then we did a Gardens Grow with Extension weekly training, and we are getting a lot of, you know, feedback and good participation. So the COVID-19 has just forced us to think outside of the box. And I think that's one good thing that has come out of of it for us is that we're no longer looking at things through the lens we were before, but we're looking at everything as how can I, create an educational program for my audience through something that I've just, blown off before.
Thank you very much, Norma. It sounds like you're becoming a YouTuber over there. So, Kevin, there's a question for you and to what degree Farmer's Voice is contributing to the content. I know you touched a little bit about it, upon it, but have it changed during COVID-19? Have it been strengthened, or have it been less, or do you see any trends during a crisis on the direct participation of the listeners in forming the content of your programs?
Well, it certainly has offered some challenges. The broadcasters cannot travel easily or at all to communities to interview people, for example, and they can't have guests come into the studio for in-the-studio interviews or panel discussions as usually happens. However, there's still plenty of farmers' voices and rural people's voices on the air because of the possibility of receiving phone calls from listeners during shows or phoning out to people. They can arrange to call out to people and even call out to groups of people if they're together to speak them together, or even sometimes you can have 2- or 3-way conversations. There's technology we've introduced to some stations where they can call, have just like this meeting here, they can have somebody in the city from a research center, a farmer in their field, an extension worker in town, all speaking together on the air using phones. So it's a real big emphasis for us is to make sure that the radio programs do feature the voices of the farmers, and we're working closely with our broadcasting partners to make sure that they can do that.
Thank you very much, Kevin. There's 2 questions here which maybe can be a little bit interlinked. There's a big question on what are they doing, what to do with this disrupted supply chains around the world, and what are lessons learned for the future. How do we avoid in the future that food security gets so negatively affected of a crisis that we are seeing happening now? Anyone wants to chip in? I'm opening the floor to any of the panelists who wants to chip in.
Maybe I can intervene.
Please. Yes. Come, Andrew.
Yeah. What we notice in Africa in general is we have, of course, these very crowded urban areas, and then the peri-urban and the rural areas. The problem is the transport between these areas. So maybe one thing we should already think of is to put in place to train people even in urban areas and to do urban agriculture, and of course even more on the peri-urbans. And on the other side also, those that are in rural areas should be really reinforced because the malnutrition and famine is also most in rural area. And I think in Africa we haven't done enough in that aspect. We are still, the production level in rural area is still very low, and extensionist has a responsibility and to deal with that. So these are just a very quick reflection, focusing, because things are going more local, so focusing on the urban agriculture, reinforcing that, and also reinforcing even more the rural area. If we want to reach SDG and reduction of famine and malnutrition, we have to do that.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to thank all the panelists and all the participants for listening in, and then I will give the floor back to the host. Christine, maybe just two words before I send it back. Andrew, as you are saying, I heard it from Andrew, I heard it from Ismail, and I heard it from Norma. And there was another webinar this morning in Asia also on value chains, and this going from global and become more local, become more aware of food quality, locally produced food, and people are starting to appreciate locally produced food if they trust the quality and they are willing to pay a premium. And it's going to be interesting to see if that trends will continue after this crisis sort of ends. If this is a trend that will continue to be there, because if we go more local, then we might be more resilient to this global impact in the future. It might be one of the ways that we can build more resilience. So that's an interesting trend, I think. Christine, over to you. Unmute.
Thanks. Hearing me now? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Carl. I think that was an excellent discussion. Of course, we all wish we had more time to discuss this, but certainly I think we've had a taste of what's going on around the world in different countries. This is truly a global pandemic, which is affecting all of us, both personally and professionally. So thanks to all of our participants who joined us today. Thanks to our panelists and to Carl and to the team behind working on answering questions and everything. Thanks to the DLEC team too. I'd just like to mention that I really think that as we saw from the different panelists today, that a lot of innovation is being forced upon us COVID, and it's really a chance to see that extension and advisory services does need to be agile and able to think critically and to make decisions and help problem solve with their communities that they're working in order to, you know, avoid some of the problems and the risks and the disruptions that are going on. So I know that there's a couple of questions that still have not been answered. So we'll leave to the end of the time for our panelists to continue to type answers, or if some of them don't get answered, we will respond to you by email, because those questions and answers will be collected. As we close out here, there's going to be a survey that's coming up just to ask you about the webinar itself. So please answer that survey. You can stay on to the end and get some of the other answers to the questions via the chat box and the Q&A. So thanks a lot for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. And we will be sending out the recording and any of the slides and the questions and answers to you as well. So thanks very much to all of you.